Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about training for maximum strength and what that even means. Because a lot of times when we're talking about maximum strength, people assume that we're talking about actual competition lifts themselves and doing them in a manner that we would demonstrate in competition. But what people forget is that oftentimes what we are doing in a competitive environment is trying to find leverages, reducing ranges of motion, and anything that we can do to make the lift easier. And making the lift easier in a competitive environment is not necessarily the same as building the maximum strength. In other words, a lot of times it's to our advantage to actually make the lifts harder. And I mean, it can be little subtle things such as removing the arch on a bench press to where you're a little more flat back. You don't ever want to be fully flat back, by the way. That actually puts your pecs in a position where you can't maximally recruit them. So you want a small arch so that you have a mild deficit. It could be a case of even sometimes if someone's going to do a sumo deadlift, of using a slightly narrower stance, or a deficit deadlift, or deadlifting in boots, because sometimes that extra 3/4 of an inch makes the lift harder. And that making it harder can make it a little bit harder to lift the weight, and it forces you to get stronger. And what people need to understand is that what some experts even feel, some of the best powerlifting coaches in the world will say, on any given exercise or movement pattern, I actually want to make people as strong as possible with the lightest weight possible. And it's because lifting the heaviest weight that you can actually move has recovery issues. It has issues with putting fatigue on your joints, putting fatigue on your spine. And that's not just a higher risk of injury, that is actually in some cases a higher chance of reducing recovery. It can make things more difficult. Look at what I'm doing right there, right? In that frame right above, I'm doing a 3-inch deficit deadlift, but I'm doing it for a heavy single. Now that is a hell of a lot harder than doing a normal deadlift. Now I've got 500 pounds there, but between those plates and my boots, that's over 3 inches of deficit added. Right, that's harder. That's harder to do, and you can't lift as much weight. But in terms of force generation, that's just as high as if I was pulling quite a bit heavier of a weight. It requires the same amount of muscle activation, but it's slightly easier to recover from. So what we need to think about in terms of developing maximum strength, it's not just about finding the leverages when you're actually going to demonstrate that strength that you've built. So how do we build maximum strength? Well, a big part of it is muscle mass. And that is something that every strength coach in the world realizes. That is something that all the researchers who look at this stuff realize, who look into hypertrophy, look into strength. What they're finding more and more is that size does equal strength. Size equals strength, and that is something that gets lost because of the whole bodybuilding world. And that's skewed largely due to drugs, and it's skewed because of the fact that there are people who are very genetically gifted, who can recruit more muscle fibers or have different distributions of muscle fibers, who maybe have leverage advantages and other things that allows them to lift very, very heavy weights relative to like their body weight or their size compared to someone else. And then people have to remember that drugs in a dose-dependent response can start to cause muscle to grow faster than strength is accumulated. And that's an interesting topic in and of itself. But because of all of that, it has really skewed the idea. And here's what I'm going to tell you. If you guys are trying to get as strong as you possibly can, then you need to put as much muscle as you possibly can on your frame. Now, the only problem with that is that beyond a certain threshold, once you've built a large base, it becomes very difficult to focus upon maximum strength and all of those things while putting maximum size on every muscle in your body. Now, the first couple of years you're training, you absolutely can. Right? You can absolutely do that. So someone who's in their first couple of years of training, any program that allows them to maximize muscle mass through their entire body, right, that allows them to grow as fast as possible and gain muscle everywhere, is going to give them the best strength outcomes. That is going to improve their maximum strength the most, because that is the most important factor in our individual maximum strength gains. And I don't mean comparing two different people. I mean inside the same person who cannot change their bone structure. Your frame that you have right now, assuming you're older than about 20, 21, there's nothing that's going to change in your frame short of an injury that's going to change your bone structure. So the muscle that you add to your frame will be the biggest factor in determining how strong you get. And so you should obviously be seeking to maximize as much muscle as you can put upon your body. Now, when you start talking relative strength, that's where body fat plays in, right? If you're talking about strength versus weight, well, obviously having as much muscle as your frame will hold while having the lowest body fat that you can get away with while retaining that muscle will give you the best relative strength. But the best maximum strength is going to come from putting as much muscle as possible on your frame. Now, after that, once you start to get more advanced and you can't always maximally stimulate every muscle in your body and still recover from it in terms of size gains, then you have to start prioritizing. That's when you start looking at, okay, if you want to get stronger on the bench press or the squat or the overhead press or the chin up or the deadlift or whatever exercise it is that you think that you need to improve upon now, which is oftentimes multiple of those, you have to start looking at which muscle is the smallest muscle and the most limiting muscle in my kinetic chain. And that's the muscle that you will need to prioritize with more training volumes, right? More training volumes for those particular muscles, because you have a limited amount of muscle growth you can gain at any given time due to recovery limits, in which case you need to focus on those more to thicken them up to improve your strength. But hypertrophy is the biggest factor, because strength, or the production of force against an external object, is essentially your motor pattern and motor unit learning versus how much total muscle you can activate at any given time to move that object. So we can talk a lot about technique, we can talk a lot about joint angle specificity, but at the end of the day, the more muscle that you can bring to bear, the more weight you're going to lift, the stronger you're going to be at any given exercise. So that includes, first of all, having more muscle. I mean, if the primary movers involved in that exercise are bigger, you're just simply going to lift more weight, no matter what else you do. Most important factors, hypertrophy. Now, after that, what are we talking about? We're talking about learning the movement patterns. We're talking about learning to perform these lifts in such a way that allows us to bring more of the muscles in our body into play. In other words, if you're going to hit a maximum bench press, and assuming it's a competitive style where you have to pause and your butt can't leave the bench, you're going to have to learn how to get your pecs more involved, right? Which that means better scapular retraction, getting tighter. It means learning to get tighter in general so that you can improve neuromuscular efficiency, so that you can learn to grip the bar harder, get tighter, learn how to use your body to explode a little bit of leg drive out of the bottom without your butt coming off the bench, which means, again, learning to ratchet up tight and incorporate more muscle so that your hips and things get involved, in addition to your pectorals firing as hard as possible out of the bottom, and then your triceps firing as hard as possible as you continue to accelerate it up to lock it out, right? Bringing as much muscle to bear as you can. Now, the first part of that is having the most muscle to bear, the most muscle fibers available, but then we have the motor unit aspect of it. So it's number one, learning how to perform that exercise. So there's a skill component. The other aspect of it is learning to press maximally in general. See, that's the beauty of it too. A person who has never done really heavy singles against a heavy weight isn't going to be as good, even if they know the form on the exercise and they have the muscle mass, because they're not used to exerting everything that they have. And then that's the final component, and that's where training heavy singles in general comes into play. In other words, if you learn how to hit a 1 rep max on a box squat or a safety bar squat or a pin squat or any form of squat, that is going to carry over to your ability to lift the heaviest weight. Same thing with your different pressing. So max effort work on any big exercise teaches you the skill of moving a heavy weight. And then the final component of that is learning the ideal bar paths and movement pattern itself for you to move the maximum weight on that exercise. Now, that comes from doing two different things. There's two different elements to that. Number one is, what you find is that there's only one way usually to pick up the heaviest weight possible on any exercise, right? So on your deadlift or whatever, like the sumo deadlift you see me doing there, there's only one exact bar path and position that will allow me to lift the most weight that my body's capable of lifting. And if I drift out of that, I won't be able to lift it. So you need to practice actually going above 90%. All right, so some lifts above 90% will teach you that skill of the body positioning required for you to lift a heavy weight, because it's only going to be one position you can do it in. And then the other one is going to be to where sometimes messing with a little bit of partial exercises through certain movements and only on certain exercises will teach you to find the individual bar paths where you might have to change direction or move your body a certain different way through a sticking point in an exercise, such as on the standing barbell press. Just when you get to the forehead, just past the top of the forehead, there's a bar path that if you shift through differently, you'll be able to lift 10 more pounds. So sometimes some partial work helps there. Sometimes some partials will help you on different exercises right through those, not because they make you physically stronger or develop muscles, because they don't, but because they teach you that subtle shift of practicing that half inch through that slightly different position lets you lift 10 more pounds. And that will matter because, again, there's only one bar path and body position on any given exercise that will allow you personally to lift the most weight. It's literally the difference between you being able to lift 500 pounds versus 510 or 520 with the same amount of strength. So there is a skill element to that. And so when we're talking about training for maximum strength, we're talking about the combination of all of these factors. We're talking about hypertrophy. We're talking about learning how to bring the most muscles involved into it. We're talking about learning how to position yourself correctly to lift maximum weight. And then we're talking about learning how to move the bar through the path that for you as a person is biomechanically going to give you the best leverages so that you can utilize all of that muscle and strength that you have effectively to display that strength. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.